Hi everyone, Tom Kinder, Tom Kin Forge. I'm here to talk to you today about a sword. Not one of mine. This sword was made by Sunny Subtles and designed by Angus Trim. It is a collaboration piece between ATrim and Valiant Armory swords, and it is fantastic. This is the Tauber sword from the Vision line, which if you're very lucky you may be able to get hold of over at Valiant Armory. It sounds like they're very busy, demand's very high, and they can't make them fast enough. But if you see one of these and you're looking for a good sword, snatch it up. And let me tell you why. Okay, first of all, let's just take a look at this sword. This sword, at very first glance, is beautiful. It's absolutely gorgeous. Everything about it is straight and nice and clean. I'm going to bring it up close so we can take a really good look at it. I'm going to start with the hilt. We've got this this lovely style 2 cross guard, couple of accent grooves cut in there. It appears to be slightly blued, and you can see the lines of the guard here and here match up with the lines of the grip very nicely. This is a really good example of a finely fit hilt. You can see, again, the lines of the grip flowing into the line of the pommel. It's almost seamless. It's really well executed. This grip reminds me a lot of Christian Fletcher grips, which, will tell you something about the quality here, because Christian Fletcher's always done really good work, and the kitty cat is determined to photobomb us. Well, that's okay. He can be there. Kitty cats are cool, right? Okay, but we have this lovely waisted grip shape, and I've got a big hand, okay? So it fits very comfortably between the risers. It also fits very comfortably down here. Now, this grip is only 7¼ inches long from here to here. However, you get another, 1.5 to 2 inches of grip space here, so you end up with well over 9 inches of grip space. And I have large hands, and I can get a gap between them, and it's very comfortable. In fact, let's see, that is a 7¼ inch grip and a 9¼ inch grippable area. Okay, now we'll see, looking down the blade. Okay, cat, hold on just a second. You, come here. No. You are not the star here. Go away. Okay. Pardon me. Thank you. Cat break. Yeah, this little jerk is gonna make an issue of it. He's my attention hound. Yes, he's a cat. He's an attention lover. Anyway, we have this is an 18B style sword, so it's got the central ridge line and the gradually tapering profile. You see the very nice and clean maker's mark right there. It appears to be etched in with an electrochemical etching process, but I do not know for sure if that's what they're using. If you look down the blade, you will see the fit of the blade to the guard is absolutely superb. That is actually a pocket, a recess in the guard, and the blade fits down inside of it. It is not butted together and sitting flush. It is actually recessed, and that is one of the tightest recessed blade fits I have ever seen on a sword. That is just fantastic. Okay, the pommel is hot peened in place. You can see slight eccentricity of the shape of the button there. That's a clue that it's been hammered. And if I can't get it on the camera, but if you look closely, there are some facets involved here on the peen itself. We have an 8-sided scent stopper pommel. That is very evenly and beautifully executed. Truly a gorgeous hilt. Okay, so I've gushed a lot about the hilt, the fit, you know, the whole thing. Oh, the leather work. Oh my gosh, I can't forget the leather work. Gotta yell just a little bit about this. You know, the seam is right here. It's very difficult to see with the actual eye, and the camera's having a hard time picking it up. The risers are very nicely done. I mean, I would prefer to have it just a little bit closer to the end of the grip, but that's a personal preference, and it doesn't cause a problem at all. Some people prefer it this way, and if that's you, good deal. For me, it would still never be a game breaker. That's a very, very well done grip. The leather is very high quality. It's tightly on there. It's fit superbly. There's no wrinkles. There's no muss. There's no fuss. It's really just a beautifully done grip. Okay. And I'll see if I can, maybe I can go this way. I'll do a flyby this way. You can see the impression of the string. You can tell that it was a twisted string, or braided string, I think, actually, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It's not as strictly historical a look as some other strings, but it is very nice, very neat, very uniform, very clean and crisp. And it's hard to ask for more than that. Okay. So the blade, getting back to the blade here, like I said, it is a Type 18B. It is a 35-inch long blade. The hilt in total from here to here is 10 inches. So it's a 45-inch overall sword. It weighs 2 pounds, 13 ounces. Now, okay, so let's talk about handling a little bit, because really, as beautiful as this sword is, handling is really where it shines, because this sword feels good, okay? This sword feels very good. I've been a fan of Angus Trim's swords for many years. I learned a lot from Gus about how to make swords, how to make them well and good. And Sonny has also, as is demonstrated by this sword. And I want to talk a little bit about sword handling and how you know when you've got a good handling sword without going out and cutting, because right now it's snowing outside and it's too cold, and I'm not going to go out and cut. The first thing you don't need to know is where it balances. All right, and yeah, okay, it balances here. All right. You know what? All that does is gives you an idea of how it's going to feel when you hold it out like this, but it's not going to give you any idea of how it feels when you move it, and how when you thrust with it, when you cut with it. You know, that static balance point is really only there to be a clue when you don't have the sword in hand. That's all it's good for. When you make a sword, when I make a sword, when people who know what they're doing make swords, typically don't even worry about that. That's not a parameter that's important until it's all done. Once you're all done, then you measure it and you report it, so that people who just look at the sword online and don't have the opportunity to hold it can have a little bit more of an idea of how it feels. I apologize for all the faces. I got an itch that's going on real bad. But anyway, so don't worry about the point of balance. I mean, if it's something really strange, like, you know, out here, ask some questions, okay? But you're not going to find much in the way of any swords that are that far out, you know? And, you know, so really, what is it that the sword feels like, and how do you know that it's a good sword? the first thing I do is I hold it out and I just kind of wiggle around. I feel how much weight is out on the tip. You know, some swords, you know, when you pick them up immediately, they're just like, oh my goodness, that's really heavy. It's a work, it's a chore to handle and carry around. But most of them aren't that egregious. All right. There's a lot of, you know, if you do a little stepping, you know, keep the point up, right? Go to some ox, some flug, you know, some alber. Switch between your stances, right? And the sword should move and flow easily between them. And I'm out of shape, fat guy. Haven't been working out lately because I've got some injuries. So forgive me if I get a little huff and puffy and if I'm a little sloppy, because swinging the swords isn't my gig anymore, unfortunately. I used to love it, and I've done it a lot, but that's the earlier part of my life now. So anyway, the big thing, however, that you really want to do is you really want to feel how the sword acts in a thrust, okay? And this will really tell you how the sword is handling, all right? Now, you want to move like you're doing a martial arts form, right? Okay, so I mean, you know, maybe you remember, okay, and we're not talking about Taekwondo stuff where the guys would just go, Hui! Okay, no. We're talking like Kung Fu or Tai Chi type forms where it's smooth, right? Okay, and you keep yourself centered and balanced, okay? That's the sort of form we're talking about. Keep yourself centered, keep yourself balanced. You step, you'll start out low, and you do, you know, just kind of a looping thrust. Do it from each side, do it from above, roll through, step. You can put a second hand on, but often I like to take and do it with just one hand, even if it's a sword that's designed for two-handed use, because two hands on there are going to decrease your sensitivity. Because what you're feeling for is you're feeling for how the sword moves, right? When you reach out with your thrust, especially when it's a looping thrust, right? Like an overhand thrust, an underhand thrust, especially these thrusts that go off the center line of your body. Very important, because, you know, if you're lined up with your body, you can just step forward and your body will support it much more strongly, and you can thrust that way with a broomstick, right? However, if you have to work around your opponent, okay, and you have to do the things that get you where you need to go, and you're moving a lot, you need to have that point delivered right where you intended, without having to struggle and without having to fight the sword. A lot of swords, you go, I'm gonna do it this way so maybe you see a little bit. You go to thrust, okay? And you gotta fight, or the tip wants, because the tip wants to go, whoa, or in some cases, the tip wants to fly up in the air, right? Or, you know, you're coming around for a looping thrust, and instead of being able to stick it there, you go, and it just sails wide, it just keeps going, or it drops short, okay? This is the result of the way the sword is dynamically tuned, okay, for its dynamic balance. Peter Johnson and those guys will tell you to do this wiggle test, right? And I'm not super good at doing this bit of it correctly. They have their way of doing things, but the way the sword moves when you're doing this or this, is also related to when you're doing this and this. Personally, I find it much easier to feel what the sword's doing in a thrust. You know, I can do a cut, and I can reach out, and I can feel where the tip is, and I can know if it's on line. But a thrust gives you a full 360-degree circle of sensitivity around your target, whereas a thrust, you know, is a line that goes through this way and that way, and it cuts a plane of sensitivity off, all right? So, is this sword good? Yes, and let me tell you why. Because when I thrust, okay, when I go like this, that tip goes right where I'm aiming for. I don't have to fight it, I don't have to struggle. I've got a little bit of wobble today, which you may see in the camera, because I have a torn labrum in my right shoulder. It's an old injury, but it's decided to give me new trouble, and it's been hurting a lot and limiting what I can do. And I'm right-handed, not left-handed, so when I do it left-handed, there's a little bit of wobble because I'm not left-handed. I am not left-handed, yes. Yeah, well, I'm not as good as an eagle with my left hand either. That's no surprise though. And my right arm, well, I just don't have the stability right now because of the shoulder. But you know, when I alternate my thrusts and I move and I step, right? I can feel that tip going right where I want it. And those last couple were a little sloppy and wide, and that was because of my shoulder. My shoulder reached its limit and said, no, buddy, we don't want to move that way, okay? But this is the test you can do at home, and it's just, you start out with like your left foot forward, your right foot back, and the sword out to the side or down low like in an alber, and you gotta move that sword, and you gotta step in, and you look at your target, and you just reach out and touch it like you're doing that, okay? Now, when I was in better shape, I used to stab the little weight hangers on pull cords for lamps and lights. You know, because I have some in my shop that hang down, and itty little things. And you know, go ahead and stab that. And with a good sword that tracks well, I could do it. All right. So you take a sword like this and you reach out, and there's no effort. You don't have to fight or struggle with the sword at all. It goes exactly where your body is putting it, all right? And it's lovely. It is so effortless. Now, it does have some weight out at the tip, all right? And I talk about tip weight every now and then, but basically that is if you hold your sword here, where you would with your top hand, right? And then you put the tip of the sword on a scale, and you relax your grip, and you just let that tip rest there on the scale. How many grams of weight are out there on the sword? Because that's the amount of weight you feel in your hand, right? That's not representative of the total weight of the sword, but it does tell you something about how much weight is out here. And the further this weight is out, the heavier it's going to be on the tip, even if it's a blade of the same weight. Like if you have two swords that weigh the exact same amount, and one of them is thicker, and like maybe it doesn't have any distal taper and it's the same thickness all the way down, like it's 1/4 inch thick from the hilt all the way to the point, and you hold like this, it's going to have a lot more weight on the tip than a sword that has some or even better correct distal taper. And everyone knows I love my distal taper, okay? This sword, I believe, is, let me check my notes, 200... let's see. Yes, it's the tip weight is 200 grams, right? And I find 200 grams to be a very nice sweet spot for tip weight. A little bit more for some swords that want to be really stout cutters. 220, 250 for stouter, you know, swords. Like type 12s, type 13s, stuff that's broader at the end. Thrusting oriented swords tend to be more around 200. And like really light swords that that are feathery and float around and are just quick, zippy, like writing sword type stuff, they can be as low as 150 grams on the tip. But honestly, when you get much outside of 150 to 300 to 250 grams of tip weight, in my opinion, it starts to get uncomfortable. Now, for some people, they will like a heavier or lighter tip weight if they're bigger and stronger, or if they're skinnier and have less, muscle to put into things. It's gonna be a personal decision to some degree. However, there are swords that are designed so egregiously bad that you put that out there and the tip weight, we're talking 500 grams or more, some of them. And I'm not gonna name names or name and shame any companies or brands or people that have done stuff like that. Y'all know who you are. And if you don't, well, maybe that's why you're doing it. Put the tip on a scale and see how much it weighs, because you want to know how much this is going to feel in hand. Now, the tip weight is not, again, it's not a statistic that a sword maker really goes for when making the sword, much like the balance point. It's a statistic that's for the consumer, for the people who don't have the chance to hold the sword and feel it for themselves. It helps you get an idea of what it feels like, okay? Because you could have a sword that was, really thin down here in the forte and just stayed thin and didn't just taper out here, and was too thin out here and too thick up here, and it would have the same, 200 grams weight. And when you do this, it would feel fine. But when you start doing the thrusts and the tracking, you're going to fight that point and it's going to wobble around, okay? Because there's a lot that goes into making a sword move and feel correctly, okay? So we've talked about the tracking, okay? Point tracking, right? And point tracking is directly related to the tracking in a cut, right? Because it all talks about when you reach out with the sword, does it go where you want it to go? Or do you have to fight it to get there? You should not have to fight your sword to get it to where you want. And a lot of swords out there, you gotta fight them, okay? So let's talk now, pardon me, about harmonic balance, which is another one of my favorite things, okay? One of the things you see a lot of people do, and it's a good test, is you slap the pommel and you watch it wiggle. And in fact, look how much that wiggles. You can see that it's still wiggling, still wiggling, still wiggling, still wiggling. And I can stop. I have to actually stop because it's just going to keep going, okay? A lot of swords you see someone hit and it goes, brr, and it's done. Or, brr, just that quick, brr, and it's done. They go, bop. And even if you hit it up here, it's not ideal, but it does still do the wiggle, right? You hit up here and it goes, oh, hey, look, here we go, right? How quickly the vibration stops after you hit it is a good clue as to how stiff the sword is. Now, in my opinion, this is a very stiff sword, all right? I can do it like this, and this actually takes some strength to bend this way, and you will notice that it really only bends deeply from here out, and this area down here is very stiff. We'll get to why that is in just a minute. But the wiggle, the harmonic balance, okay, is very important to a sword. You'll see that there's a spot right here, okay, where the blade does not appear to wiggle, right? More importantly, there's another spot. I got a light in the way. Right here, okay, where it also does not wiggle. This is the blade node. This is the hilt node. Now, there's a disagreement among sword makers among very good high-level sword makers as to where exactly the hilt node should be. People who subscribe to Angus Trim's philosophy of sword making, as I do, and it was also this theory was co-authored by Tinker Pierce. Gus and Tinker developed a lot of their theory on harmonics together. Did great work. about 2 decades ago to start developing and putting it out into public. And from there, it's only grown and grown and grown. But in their thoughts, which I agree with, the node on the hilt belongs right about where your top finger is going to go. It can be anywhere from right where the guard joins the handle all the way down to where your top finger sits. This one sits right about there, and it's beautiful. All right. Now, if this node wanders around a bit and gets to different parts in the handle, it can cause you problems. When you hit something, it can sting your hand, it can hurt. But more significantly, it has been found that when the node does not fall right here, that means that the weight distribution of the sword is off. And when you go to do your thrusts and your cuts, okay, you're going to have to fight to get that tip to go where you want, okay? And there are historical swords, there are examples of antique swords with hilt nodes all over the place. And does that mean they're bad swords? Maybe. I don't know. I try not to judge antique swords as to good or bad because they were what they were and they had reasons for being what they were. And sometimes the reason was that they were a bad sword, but I don't feel like I have the authority to judge that decisively. So I just tend to decide that if I see something that doesn't make sense, that there's something that I don't understand. It's like, okay, well, it looks like a bad sword, it walks like a bad sword, it smells like a bad sword, but maybe it's just a sword that I don't understand, especially if there's evidence that the sword was used in combat historically. Yeah, here or there. The point is that some people will argue that, oh, the hilt node belongs in other places based upon antiques. Fine. And if that's the way they want to see it and do it, there's nothing wrong with that. Don't ever tell someone that they're wrong because of that, because they're not. They're not wrong. They're just doing it their way, okay? Now, our way, the way we make swords, is we want the sword to be as good a performer as possible. The very top of the top performance first. We want a fighting person of history to come over in a time machine, pick this sword up and go, whoa, that feels good. I want this one, right? I like this, okay? That's the idea here, okay? We want to the best example within historical parameters, okay? There are many swordsmiths out there who make swords that are more interested in historical accuracy, like they not just like a typical sword of the time like this, but they want, you know, a rendition of this exact sword made, and they don't care if that sword was a great sword or a poor sword or a mediocre sword. They want to recreate it faithfully so that they understand what the fighting man in history had to hold in his hands when he fought. And just like a future historian, you know, maybe 500, 800 years in our future, would look back and look at our cars and our automobiles today, one guy might be interested in, well, what did the Ford Focus or the Chevy Impala or the Toyota Celica or whatever, just, you know, normal, mid-range, common people driving them, what do those cars feel like? Are they the best cars on the road? Absolutely not. They are not the best cars on the road, okay? And so some historians and some sword makers are interested in those kinds of swords for that reason. The types of swords we're interested in is the sports cars, the race cars, the high performance vehicles. High performance vehicle, all right? That's what we're looking for. That's what we're trying to recreate. And it's a much more select spectrum of historical authenticity. There are historical swords that are like that, and those are the ones that we're interested in. So there's that. Now, oh yes, I wanted to talk about Distal Taper, because you know I love it, okay? You do like that, okay? And yes, it snaps right back to straight. This is a very, very stiff sword. It starts out at about a 1/4 inch thick, and you know, for the first 8 or so inches of the blade, it has almost no change in thickness whatsoever. It's even got, I don't know if you can see it too well, but it's got like a flat land there instead of being like a ridge line there. Up here, it's got like a flat bit, okay? And that is a feature that is found on many historical swords of this type. So it's not a modern thing that's been invented by anybody here. It's just, it's a feature, and what it does is it helps stiffen up this part of the sword, the forte, yeah, or the strong of the sword. You might not be able to, you can see right there, you see the flat, you see that edge shining back at you. That means that part of the blade is not sharpened, and it actually is, up here, it's actually quite thick. Now, what that does is that puts a little more steel on the edge. It means that the angle of the bevel is, you know, a little less sharp, which means there's more steel there, there's more weight there, and there's more stiffness. And all these things focus on creating a stiff base for the sword, a nice stiff foundation, because an 18B is designed to come into battle, block, wrestle, you know, half sword, stab and thrust that way, this way. It pries, it hits, it leverages, and it needs to be sturdy. It needs to be nice and stiff down here. But when you get out here, you do still want it to cut, and you want it to be agile so that you have the speed and the dexterity to get beyond your opponent's guards, right? So, after the first 8 inches or so of the blade, it starts to thin down smoothly, not quickly. There's one spot right around 9-10 inches where you get a little bit of a sudden drop in thickness. It's not enough that you can really even feel it. You have to get calipers out and measure it. Pardon me. And it thins down, and it thins down to about, most of the primary cutting area, it's about 160 thousandths of an inch thick, you know, give or take some. And then after the first 2/3 of the blade, the last third of the blade thins aggressively, and you can see that it bends much more easily when I do this flex test, right? Okay, that will show you, that shows you right there what the distal taper is like. And this is called a convex distal taper. In fact, if you hold the sword like this and you make, you know, an outline with the shape of it, and then you would flip it over, you know, and do like that, it would make kind of like an almond shape. Okay, it's fat, and it curves toward the point in a sweeping arch that goes out, right? Well, that's kind of what the distal taper does as well. It doesn't get thicker, but it gets thin slowly, and then it gets thin quickly at the very end, making a teardrop or an apple seed or an almond shape, okay? Convex distal taper is an excellent form of distal taper to make your swords stiff and move good in a thrust. They do work for cutting also, but the distal taper, the style of distal taper that you get, and the weight distribution and the harmonics you get with a convex, I always gotta make sure I say the right one, a convex distal taper tends to give you what you want for a thrust-oriented sword, okay? A linear taper can be very good. In fact, it seems that a great number of historical swords were linear distal taper, just a straight, even amount of thickness loss from here to here, right? And that's normal, that's fine, that's good for a lot of different types of swords. this type of sword really, really likes a convex. And so seeing a convex distal taper on this is very nice. It means that the person that's making it is paying attention to history and to antiques, and he knows what causes what to work, okay? Now, so 160,000 down through the cutting area, and the last third it tapers down quickly until you get an inch from the point, somewhere up in here, and that is only 65 thousandths of an inch. 0.065 inches down here. That's thin. That's real thin. But you know what? It's still pretty stiff because you have the geometry of this ridge line. Okay, you got the flattened diamond shape, which adds a little stiffness. Okay. Some people like to tell you that heat treatment, that if the steel is harder, that it will be stiffer. This is not true. Stiffness of the blade relies almost entirely on just gross thickness and how thick it is. And to a lesser extent, the geometry and the shape of the blade it is. Like a triangle will flex differently than a rectangle or an oval, because the stress and the strain distributes differently across the shape, all right? So, flattened diamond is the cross section a 18B should have in its forward section. This one does. It's very nicely done. We already talked about aesthetics, but it's nicely done. It's well executed, and it acts the way it should. Okay. So there is another test that I like to do, and I'm going to bring this out here because we talked about the node, right? And let me just make sure that's in the camera properly. Okay, and this isn't the best or ideal setup for this test, but people talk about, the blade node, this being the ideal place to hit your target where it's going to do the most damage because you lose the least amount of energy to this wobble. Because when you hit something, it is going to cause the blade to wobble. And the more the blade is able to wobble, the more energy gets lost to making it go this way instead of this way, which is the way you want it to go when you cut something, right? Now, while this is a good approximation, I think that it leaves something to be desired. There's a lot of detail about how a sword cuts and where the good spot to hit is that you don't get from just slapping and watching the wiggle, right? So what I do is I hold the hilt very loosely down here where my hand would go, okay? And I take the tip and I drop it a few inches, right? And you can see at the very tip of this, it bounces a lot. And that's normal because it's a very narrow tip, right? And it's meant for thrusting, and the tip of the sword is not the best spot to cut. So you pick it up and you drop it onto the end grain of a 2x4 or 4x4. The more sturdy this is, the better. This is sitting on carpet, which is not ideal, so there's going to be a little extra bounce, but it'll still give you the same idea, right? Oh, do you see that? See how much less bounce there is there than there is there? All right. And I am using this edge of the board primarily. That way I know I have a more precise idea of where it's hitting. So I can say this part of the blade, not this part of the blade, all right? Makes a difference. Aha, see there? That didn't bounce at all, did it? That bounced, that didn't bounce. So right there is where the sweet spot starts. But the non-wiggly spot is down here, right? See, the non-wiggly spot is here. But we're talking up here, there, for the spot that doesn't really bounce, right? Okay, so I'm going to keep my finger there. And you see this is not bouncing at all. It's just landing and sticking, right? Okay, and I'm not putting any force in this. I'm not using my right hand to drive it at all. I even got my fingers out, so I really can't, right? And it's still landing very solid, okay? Right? Landing very solid. Okay, you hear the brr, brr. You're not going to see it bounce as much when you get out of it on this end because you got all this weight down here that's holding it down, right? But if you listen, brr, you hear a little brr, okay? That means you're starting to vibrate a little bit more and you're out of the sweet spot, okay? Now, I cheated. I measured this earlier, but your sweet spot is that much of the sword, okay? Now, a lot of you, some of you, I don't know, some of you for sure may not understand just how amazing this is. That area between my thumbs, when it hits a target, very little energy is lost to making the blade wiggle back and forth, okay? It hits, and it mostly sticks, or it completely sticks, depending on where you're at, right? Now, a lot of swords that I have tested that were, you know, the cheaper manufactured swords, mass manufactured swords from India, China, Pakistan, but even ones made in the US or, you know, Europe or wherever by small-time smiths or people who just didn't know. A lot of times you'll have an area that big, or maybe even just one point on the sword that doesn't bounce when you hit it. You can have, I've seen sweet spots as small as like a 1/16 of an inch long. This one is almost 8 inches long. And there is not any swords on the market that have a sweet spot that big that I have ever seen other than Angus trim swords, a few of my swords, but my swords are not generally on the market because I'm injured and I don't make them very fast. And they're, you buy a sword from me, wait a long time, and it's just the way it is. Sorry. Before Sonny made this line of swords to Gus's specifications, ATrim's a couple of tinkers and maybe one or two others from the better custom smiths, okay, were the only swords that would have sweet spots this big. An 8-inch sweet spot means that this sword is going to be a powerhouse when it cuts. Because when you hit your target, you're hardly losing a thing, okay? All that force goes right into the edge and you just sail right through clean and beautiful. You couple that with the fact that the point tracks and moves and goes exactly where you want it without any sort of effort at all. You couple that with its very reasonable, light, and handy weight of 2 pounds, 13 ounces in this case. And all this adds up together into a sword that is really a joy to handle. And this sword I haven't cut anything with it, but I don't need to. I've done this long enough. I've cut with swords, and fought with swords for about 3 decades. I've been making swords for about 8 years. I've been doing this a while, and I've gotten used to the signs that point to what a good sword is, and haven't yet been fooled. Okay, I haven't yet picked up a sword, done the test, go, oh, that looks great, and have it be a bad sword. Hasn't happened yet. I don't think it will. So, these tests you can do yourself on your own swords, and some of it is subjective. Some of it is going to change based on how you move and how you act. The sharpness of your edge can make a difference too. If you got a really, really sharp edge, you might stick in the piece of wood when it would otherwise want to bounce just because it's super sharp and wants to bite and the wood holds it. But if you listen closely, you can hear the vibration, all right? So let's see. Distal Taper, wheel handles, and so this sword, once again, this sword was designed by Angus Trim. He made the specifications. He said, this is how thick it needs to be here and there and there. This is how wide it needs to be, how long it needs to be, etc. So on. And let's just go through this real quick. I know I've said a lot of them, but let's put it all in one place, right here at the end. Okay. In total, it is 2 pounds, 13 ounces. The weight of the tip, when you rest it on a scale and hold it at the handle, is 200 grams. That's how much weight you feel. It's not much. Overall, it is 45 inches long. The blade is 35 inches long. The hilt from the top of the pommel to the bottom of the guard is 10 inches. The grip is 7¼ inches long, and the grippable area from here to here is 9¼ inches long. Okay. So the fit, the finish, the aesthetics are superb. But as good as they are, the handling is better. If someone had handed me this sword and told me this is a sword made by Angus Trim, hilted by Christian Fletcher, and Christian Fletcher is the guy that people who buy Albions send their Albions to get them touched up and improve their aesthetic, right? The aesthetics are up to Christian Fletcher level aesthetics. However, Christian Fletcher is also one of those guys that, I'm sorry if you're watching this, Christian, but he does not have as strong a grasp on performance and harmonics as Gus, and now apparently Sonny. Okay? And so when Christian would design the hilt and hilt it up, you would lose a little bit of performance. And I've seen this myself. I've handled ATrim swords that were hilted by Christian, and while he did a wonderful job, and they were all very good, they never quite reached the full heights of handling that a sword entirely made by Gus would. They just looked a lot better because Gus was never much an aesthetics guy, right? Okay, so this sword to me is indistinguishable from a sword made by Angus Trim when it comes to performance. There might be a very small gap, a pretty small difference in the standards, but I am unable to detect it. Okay, Gus has made some swords that were not as good as this, although they disappeared and they never came back, and they were only marginally less good. And he's made swords that were better than this. But this absolutely does fit into the range of ATrim quality. And if you pick it up and you feel it, it's like, yeah, that feels like an ATrim. But it's a Valiant Armory. And I tell you what, Sonny Suttles over the years has come a long, long way. When he bought Valiant Armory back in, oh gosh, I think it was like 2006 or something. That company was an importer of blades made in, like, I don't know, Pakistan or India or somewhere, and they were terrible, clunky chunk of brick swords. They were bad. And he got rid of all those, and he introduced new lines. He worked with Gus even back then, and they did swords from China, and really changed the market, honestly, and showed us just how good a Chinese sword could be, and stood side by side with the Hanwei Tinkers, which was a Tinker design sword made in China, and was of similar or better performance level for a long time. But there's always difficulties when you ship from overseas, especially China. There's weird laws, there's shipping issues, there's customs. Lots and lots of stuff can go wrong, and did. And eventually, as Sonny got better and better at what he does, making scabbards, making the hilts, making the handles, putting it all together, shining it up, and as he was learned from Gus, he became a better sword maker. And eventually, as is natural, he decided, hey, I can do this. And he talked to Gus, and they came to some arrangements, and now Sonny Suttles of Valiant Armory is making swords designed by Angus Trim, and they are fantastic. This is the Vision line. This particular sword is the Tauber longsword out of the Vision line. It is light, it is fast, it has enough blade presence to be powerful, but it snaps and it moves. It doesn't go sluggish when you move and float. It's sudden, it's abrupt. It gets there and it sticks, which I love. A lot of people want a sword, they go swish, 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 and they feel no weight on the tip. But that's fine. If they like that, that's cool. But I like these swords that They're sudden. They snap into place. They snap from here to there. Now, this sword does that, and it does it really, really well. And that's one of the features of Gus's better handling swords that makes them so amazing, and I've always liked too. So, to close up, I'm really, really impressed with this sword. I think Sunny Settles did a fantastic job. I do not even know what he's charging for them, but I'll bet you it's not enough. I'll bet you it's a killer deal. If he's charging less than Angus Trim does for his, then you're getting a steal. And if he's charging a little bit more, it's worth it because you get this beautiful hilt, this beautiful aesthetic that Gus does not do. All right. Gus's aesthetic looks a lot better than it did years ago, but this is a step beyond that. This is really, really beautiful stuff. All right. And so I'm going to stop babbling at you, and I'm going to sign off. I'm going to thank you for watching, and I'm going to advise you that if you get a chance to pick up one of these Vision Line swords by Valiant Armory, the Tauber, or whatever, whichever other one that you may have the opportunity, jump on it, because this stuff's good. This stuff's real good. All right. One last close up to say goodbye. And thank you for watching.